Welcome to Policy Connections, where we connect you with policymakers across the state. Today we have Governor Butch Otter and Alex LaBeau, the president of IACI, with us today. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us. Governor, as we begin the 2013 legislative session, would you care to share some of your thoughts on the upcoming session and your legislative agenda?
Well, of course, what's going to hit up that agenda, as it does every year, is the budget and where we spend the money in that budget. We're limited to, fortunately, in Idaho, Article 7, subsection 11 of the Constitution says you can't spend more money than you bring in. So we're limited to those resources that we have. As I look at the preliminary of the budget, the one that's submitted to the legislature, it appears we're going to be adequately in our ability. We're going to be adequate in our ability to fund the necessary and proper roles of government. Obviously, the insurance exchange, whether or not we extend Medicaid, we were under the gun on the insurance exchange, but not so on Medicaid. So we'll have a lot more time to deliberate those issues. Personal property tax, the whole tax issue. I think whether it's internet taxes, look at some of the 87 exemptions in the tax code, I think all of those things are probably going to be subject matter, and you'll hear some discussion about them in the legislature. And then, of course, there's going to be everybody's special little piece of legislation. And when you've got 105 folks, you're going to have at least 105 different ideas of what their legislation is going to look like.
Thank you, Governor. Alex, would you care to share some thoughts on the business community's agenda for this legislative session?
Well, we have really three high points in our agenda this year. Obviously, leading off, as Mike Reynoldson talked in the last Policy Connections, is going to be the elimination of the personal property tax. And we're going to work very hard to create a situation where we can phase this out over 6 years, which is our current proposal. Certainly there's going to be a lot of debate about how and if some of those budgets should be replaced, and I think that will be probably dominating much of the tax policy debate throughout the legislative session. So I think that we will be engaged in that, and hopefully a lot of the business community across the country will be, or excuse me, across Idaho would be interested in this, and hopefully across the country as well, as we try to make sure that everybody knows that Idaho is open for business. Second issue, as the governor talked about, was the exchange issue, and working with the governor's office and trying to make sure that Idaho continues to have a seat at the table, I think is pretty important. And the only way that we can do that is by remaining engaged in the process. And the governor made the decision to move forward with the state exchange, and I think that really sends a strong message that, you know, we may not like all of the provisions of it, but we're going to stay at the table and do the best we can for businesses and individuals in the state of Idaho, given the circumstances of what we have. Lastly, oddly enough, we're going to be involved in fish consumption, and there is a proposal out there to fund a fish consumption study in the state of Idaho to find out how much fish people are consuming in the state. Why would we be interested in something like that? Well, that establishes your water quality standards, and we want to actually know what the science is. How much, what kind, and where are people consuming these fish? And that will make a difference in terms of how our water quality systems will work throughout the next several decades. So we're hopeful that we can help fund that study.
Thank you, Alex.
That's interesting. You know, that is very interesting, because if you take a look at this last year's fire season, the reason, and you folks are right on, one of the things that happened as a result of us burning up 1,700,000 acres of forest and rangeland in Idaho was we put a lot of pollutants in the air. In fact, it's estimated that we would need 4.6 million cars in Idaho to put the same amount of carbon monoxide in the air that those fires did. But those fires also released 2.5 tons of mercury. And as your study will probably show, well, it may be too early for that to show up this early in the fish, but it's probably an ongoing program which we are going to be engaged in through the DEQ as well, and Fish and Game, to make sure that the amount of pollutants and the amount of damage that was done to the watershed by those fires and how that's going to affect the aquatic life in Idaho and our watersheds.
Thank you, Governor. Governor, you began your political career in the Idaho State Legislature. This year, going into the 2013 session, following redistricting the election from last year, we're going to have a record number of new people. From new members of leadership, new chairmen in both the House and the Senate, and a record number of freshmen joining the group.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think that will impact the 2013 legislative session in your agenda?
Well, the future's really not ours to see. It's probably ours to try to deal with. But I would tell you that there are a record number this year. But Idaho is very fortunate because we have a citizen legislature. It's not a professional legislature. And I've had to deal in other states with professional legislatures, the time that I spent in Congress, the same way. But the school teacher puts down the chalk, the farmer puts down the irrigation shovel, and the realtor slides the contracts aside. The lawyers do the same, and they all come together in Boise, so from all walks of life. Actually, it's a great benefit for Idaho because then we get all of those opinions on every piece of legislation, on every budget item. And quite frankly, it'll be a tremendous learning experience for everybody there. I can remember when I first came to the legislature in 1973, I was really impressed by the wisdom of those folks that I served with in the House. And I got so that I relied on them, not only for interpreting some of the legislative policies for me, but also off our professional and legislative business in my business world. I would call them up and say, hey, I remember you talking about this in the legislature. You build great friendships, you build great relations, and I say again, the bottom line is we're very fortunate in Idaho that we still have a citizen legislature.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Alex. And thank you for joining us for this episode of Policy Connections. Please tune in to the next episode when we'll interview key policymakers from around the state.